It's February 23, 1945. The location is Hill 362 on Iwo Jima. Corporal Herschel Woody Williams moves forward, straining under the immense weight of his equipment. 70 pounds of steel, fuel, and pressurized gas are lashed to his back, pulling at his shoulders with every labored step. Through swirling smoke and clouds of volcanic ash, a grim scene emerges. What little remains of his demolition squad lies scattered across the volcanic rock. All 6 soldiers are either dead or grievously wounded. 4 riflemen crouch nearby, their weapons barking steadily as they try to keep Japanese defenders' heads down. Williams pushes onward toward a fortified concrete bunker that has already stopped 3 entire Marine companies in their tracks. Inside the tank strapped to Williams's back sits roughly 4 gallons of a specially formulated fuel mixture. Diesel oil blended with high-octane aviation gasoline. He has perhaps 7 seconds of continuous flame time, just 7 seconds to expose himself completely to enemy fire, 7 seconds during which Japanese machine gunners tracking that brilliant orange stream of flame will have a perfect target. 7 seconds that military statisticians calculated was approximately half the average combat lifespan for a flamethrower operator. Those statistics are sobering. The numbers tell a horrifying story. Look at the casualty figures from flamethrower battalions deployed to Iwo Jima. One single battalion suffered a 92% casualty rate. Not wounded. Casualties. Men who were dead, missing, or so catastrophically injured they would never return to combat. This is the story of how America's most devastatingly effective weapon became its most deadly assignment, and why the men who carried fire into battle faced worse survival odds than any other Marine fighting on the bloodiest battlefield in Marine Corps history. The weapon itself looked almost primitive. The M2 flamethrower, introduced in 1944, consisted of 3 cylindrical tanks arranged in a backpack configuration. 2 larger tanks held approximately 4 gallons of fuel. A carefully engineered mixture of diesel oil and high-octane aviation gasoline designed to burn longer and hotter than pure gasoline alone. Nestled between these fuel tanks was a smaller cylinder containing compressed nitrogen, the propellant that would force the fuel mixture through the entire system at 300 pounds per square inch of pressure. A flexible rubber hose ran from the backpack down to the firing wand, essentially a metal tube featuring a pistol grip and 2 separate triggers. The rear trigger released the nitrogen pressure, forcing fuel through the system. The front trigger activated a cartridge-based ignition system with 5 igniter cartridges arranged in a revolver configuration, providing reliable spark ignition even during intense combat conditions. When fully loaded with fuel and propellant, the M2 weighed 70 pounds. The weapon possessed an effective range of approximately 20 meters, though under perfect conditions the flame could extend to 40 meters. Yet effectiveness and range meant nothing when measured against the reality of Iwo Jima. The total continuous burn time was 7 to 8 seconds, though experienced operators quickly learned to fire in short controlled bursts to stretch their limited fuel supply as far as possible. Each burst consumed roughly half a gallon per second, creating a rolling fireball of diesel-fueled flame that could penetrate bunker openings, flow into cave systems, and most critically, consume the oxygen that human bodies desperately needed inside enclosed spaces. The weapon killed through multiple mechanisms. It killed through burns, yes, but it also killed through asphyxiation, turning Japanese defensive positions into killing chambers where men were either incinerated or suffocated when flames consumed all breathable air. The volunteers who carried these weapons understood the danger, though perhaps not completely until they faced actual combat. Private First Class Joseph Rabachowicz enlisted in the Marine Corps in 1942, driven by patriotic fervor following Pearl Harbor and the inspiring stories circulating about Guadalcanal. After finishing boot camp at Paris Island, he could have remained stateside at a naval base in New London, Connecticut, standing guard duty for the war's duration. Instead, energized by combat stories from Marines rotating back from the Pacific, he requested assignment to a combat unit. His journey led to the demolition and flamethrower school at Camp Lejeune in July 1944. The training was punishing and technical. Instructors drilled the mechanical operation of the M2 repeatedly, teaching how to prime the ignition system, maintain proper nitrogen pressure, detect fuel leaks that could transform the operator into a living torch. They trained the proper firing stance, leaning forward to counteract the weapon's powerful recoil when compressed nitrogen exploded through the system. Woody Williams vividly recalled the learning process. He would later say he lost count of how many times he singed off his eyebrows and arm hair while mastering weapon control. The propellant's force created substantial kick upon discharge. Unless the operator braced correctly and leaned into the blast, the barrel could swing upward, raining burning fuel back down onto the operator himself. Williams witnessed an undertrained Marine, acting out of desperation, grab an abandoned flamethrower and fire it without proper stance. The man was engulfed instantly and killed. Beyond technical proficiency lay tactical understanding. Operators had to learn how to approach fortified positions, coordinate with rifle squads providing covering fire, and crucially, how to survive long enough to reach the target. Training emphasized that flamethrower operators never operated in isolation. Standard doctrine called for 4 to 6 man fire teams. The primary operator plus an assistant carrying extra fuel cylinders and ignition cartridges, with at least 2 riflemen, preferably armed with Browning automatic rifles. Their critical task was providing suppressing fire while the flamethrower team approached enemy positions. In theory, riflemen would pin down Japanese defenders while the flamethrower got close enough to engage. The assistant would help reload or assume control if the primary operator was hit. It sounded like workable tactical doctrine. On Iwo Jima, it almost never functioned as planned. Corporal Williams and Private Rabatuich were part of a much larger narrative, one that began not with American strategy, but with Japanese determination. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, a career officer descended from samurai lineage, had spent time in the United States during the 1920s, training with cavalry units at Fort Bliss, Texas. Unlike many Japanese commanders who dismissed Americans as soft and undisciplined, Kuribayashi grasped exactly what he faced. Years earlier, he had written to his wife that the United States was the worst possible enemy Japan could fight, describing American industrial capacity as vast and extraordinary, the people as industrious and resourceful. He harbored no illusions about American military capability. When Prime Minister Hideki Tojo personally assigned him in May 1944 to defend Iwo Jima, Kuribayashi understood victory was impossible, but he could make conquest so costly that America might reconsider invading the Japanese mainland. Arriving on Iwo Jima in June 1944, Kuribayashi immediately began restructuring the volcanic island into the Pacific's most formidable defensive fortress. He rejected traditional Japanese doctrine completely. Rather than defend the beaches and attempt to throw invaders back into the sea, he would permit them to land unopposed. Instead of launching suicidal banzai charges that squandered troops for minimal advantage, he would preserve his forces and compel Americans to assault every individual position. His strategy was devastatingly simple: maximize casualties through layered defense, prolonged resistance, and coordinated firepower from mutually supporting positions that bombardment or aerial attack could not destroy. To accomplish this vision, Kuribayashi mobilized his 23,000-man garrison in the most ambitious engineering project Japan had undertaken. A quarter of his entire force was assigned to construction and tunneling operations. Mining engineers traveled from Japan to design an underground complex virtually impervious to bombardment. Iwo Jima's volcanic rock comprised soft pumice and harder basalt layers that could be carved using hand tools across many sections. Where rock proved too dense, construction teams employed explosives and pneumatic drills. Over 8 months, Japanese engineers excavated over 11 miles of tunnels through Iwo Jima's volcanic substrate, creating a 3-dimensional fortress descending as deep as 75 feet below the surface. The tunnel network demonstrated breathtaking sophistication. Principal chambers capable of accommodating 300 to 400 soldiers functioned as barracks, command centers, and storage for ammunition, provisions, and water supplies. Smaller caves holding just 2 or 3 soldiers served as fighting positions. These tunnels interconnected in an elaborate network, permitting troops to move unseen between locations, reinforce endangered areas, withdraw when a position became indefensible, and reoccupy positions American forces believed they had cleared. Ventilation shafts delivered fresh air circulation, though sulfurous volcanic gases required careful management throughout many sections. Multiple entrances and exits ensured troops wouldn't be trapped if Japanese defenders destroyed one opening. The Nanto bunker housing naval headquarters extended 90 feet underground with sufficient supplies to sustain its garrison for 3 months. Above ground, Kuribayashi's engineers constructed over 600 concrete pillboxes and blockhouses. These were not hastily improvised fortifications. They were reinforced concrete structures featuring walls 4 feet thick, resistant to everything except direct hits from battleship artillery. Pillboxes were positioned to deliver overlapping fields of fire, meaning each position could support its neighbors. Marines approaching one bunker would encounter crossfire from adjacent locations. Japanese forces had cut loopholes permitting machine gunners to fire while remaining nearly completely concealed. Positions were camouflaged beneath volcanic ash and vegetation, remaining practically invisible until opening fire. Weapons covered the beaches, both operational airfields, and every natural avenue of approach across the island. The defensive arsenal was impressive. Kuribayashi's garrison possessed approximately 300 anti-aircraft guns, 120 large naval guns ranging from 4.7 to 6 inches, 438 artillery pieces, 69 anti-tank guns, and 23 tanks. They stockpiled 22 million rounds of small-caliber ammunition. Hundreds of Japanese sniper positions and concealed machine gun nests covered virtually every yard of territory on the island. Among the more formidable weapons were 320mm spigot mortars, massive projectiles that arced high through the air before plunging down with devastating impact. Kuribayashi engineered his defensive network so that every section of Iwo Jima lay within Japanese defensive fire zones. No safe areas existed for attacking Marines. This 8-square-mile volcanic rock possessed strategic significance because of its location. Iwo Jima sat almost directly midway between American air bases in the Mariana Islands and Tokyo, approximately 750 miles from each. 2 operational airfields and 1 under construction made it valuable territory. For Japan, it functioned as an early warning station, radioing reports of incoming B-29 bomber formations back to the homeland, providing air defenders advance notice. Japanese fighters based on Iwo intercepted American bombers traveling toward Japan. For America, capturing Iwo would eliminate this threat, provide a base for fighter escorts protecting B-29s all the way to Japanese cities, and offer an emergency landing field for damaged bombers unable to complete the long journey back to the Marianas. The strategic calculation appeared straightforward. The human expense would prove almost unimaginable. American planning for Operation Detachment, the invasion's codename, commenced in September 1944. The Marines would form the assault force, the 3rd, 4th, and 5th Marine Divisions, totaling approximately 70,000 Marines and attached Navy personnel. Supporting them was the largest fleet yet assembled in the Pacific, around 450 ships including 12 aircraft carriers, 8 battleships, and numerous cruisers, destroyers, and logistics vessels. Lieutenant General Holland Smith, commanding the 5th Amphibious Corps, grasped the challenges ahead. Intelligence officers had examined aerial reconnaissance photographs carefully. They had researched Japanese defensive tactics from previous island campaigns. Smith requested 10 consecutive days of naval bombardment prior to landing to degrade the defenses. He received only 3 days, a decision driven by Admiral Nimitz's schedule constraints for subsequent operations, including the planned invasion of Okinawa. The preliminary bombardment commenced on February 16, 1945. For 3 days, battleships, cruisers, and destroyers pounded Iwo Jima with thousands of shells, while carrier aircraft bombed and strafed identified targets. It was an impressive demonstration of firepower, yet largely ineffective. Underground positions remained immune to bombardment. Reinforced concrete pillboxes could withstand everything except direct hits from the largest naval guns. Crater patterns created by the barrage would supply cover for Japanese defenders while creating obstacles for attacking Marines. Numerous positions suffered no damage at all. Their camouflage was so effective that American observers simply never detected them. February 19, 1945, dawned grey and frigid. At 0900 hours, the first marine wave landed on Iwo Jima's southeastern beaches. They faced an unexpected problem immediately. The beach was not sand, it was volcanic ash, steep terraces of soft grey pumice offering no solid footing. Men sank to their ankles with every step. Tracked vehicles bogged down, tanks struggled climbing the 15-foot terraces. Marines attempting to excavate foxholes watched the loose ash cave back into every depression they dug. The volcanic powder was extraordinarily fine, clogging weapons, jamming mechanical systems, and infiltrating every piece of equipment. For the first hour, there was almost no enemy fire. Kuribayashi's strategy was executing flawlessly. He permitted the Marines to land unopposed. He permitted them to struggle up the beaches. He permitted them to bunch together as follow-on waves arrived and congested the landing zones. He waited until approximately 30,000 Marines were ashore, compressed into a beachhead barely 1,000 yards deep. Then he unleashed his guns. The result was catastrophic. Artillery, mortars, and machine guns erupted simultaneously from positions scattered across the island. Mount Suribachi, the dormant volcano dominating Iwo's southern end, blazed with fire from dozens of hidden positions. The high ground to the north, bristling with artillery, poured shells into the packed beaches. Marines fell by the hundreds in the opening hour of sustained fire. The loose volcanic ground that had hindered their advance now transformed into a death trap. Too soft to dig into for cover, too unstable to traverse quickly. Tracked vehicles and tanks urgently needed to break the stalemate struggled to escape the beaches. Some were destroyed by artillery before they could maneuver. Others bogged down and became immobile targets. Private First Class James Norton, serving with the 3rd Battalion, 28th Marines, 5th Division, would remember the terror. Nobody spoke as they approached the beach. Nobody knew what awaited them. The optimistic intelligence predictions of light resistance and rapid victory dissolved in the first hours of fighting. By sunset on D-Day, Marines had established fragile footholds at tremendous cost. Over 519 were killed in action and over 2,400 total casualties, and this was merely the beginning. 5 weeks of the most ferocious close-quarters combat in Marine Corps history lay ahead. Flamethrower operators landed with their units on D-Day, though most weren't deployed immediately. The initial assault concentrated on securing the beachhead and advancing inland. But by February 21st, D+2, it became evident that conventional weapons were inadequate. Japanese positions were too thoroughly constructed, too skillfully concealed, too perfectly coordinated with neighboring positions. Artillery and naval bombardment could destroy some surface targets, but proved useless against the tunnel networks. Infantry attacks without specialized equipment resulted in appalling casualties. The fighting men needed specialists in demolition work and those trained with flamethrowers. Corporal Williams arrived on February 21st, landing with the 3rd Marine Division. His official designation was Demolition Sergeant, though the weapon he carried most was the M2 flamethrower. He commanded a 6-man unit of flamethrower and demolition specialists, men trained for the lethal work of approaching fortified enemy positions and destroying them through a combination of explosives and burning fuel. Williams had already tasted combat on Guam before reaching Iwo Jima, where he first experienced just how devastating a flamethrower could be against Japanese fortifications. But Guam had not prepared him for what awaited on this volcanic island. The textbook doctrine for flamethrower employment seemed simple enough. When Marines hit a fortified position that stopped their advance cold, they would request a flamethrower team. Riflemen armed with M1 Garands and Browning automatic rifles would establish a base of fire first, pouring sustained suppressing fire into the target pillbox or cave opening to keep enemy defenders pinned down and unable to shoot back. With covering fire in place, the flamethrower operator, his assistant, and perhaps a few additional riflemen would move forward as close as they could manage. The ideal distance was 20 meters, where the weapon worked best. Then came the engagement. The operator would trigger burst after burst of burning fuel through the opening, continuing until he exhausted his fuel supply or the target ceased to be a threat. But reality at Iwo Jima bore almost no resemblance to this theory. The Japanese had woven their defensive network so intricately that Marines could not suppress one position without drawing fire from others nearby. The defensive fields interlocked perfectly, making it nearly impossible for anyone to approach a single pillbox without getting caught in crossfire. Japanese marksmen stationed in higher positions throughout the defensive zone made flamethrower operators their primary targets. The bright orange flame could be seen from hundreds of meters away, becoming a beacon that announced the operator's exact location to every enemy soldier in sight. Moving while firing slowed the operator down considerably. The weapon's weight, the need to aim properly, and the resistance of the rubber hose connecting the backpack to the firing nozzle all hampered movement. Essentially, the operator became stationary while engaging, transforming himself into a sitting target for enemy fire. The backpack presented its own terrible vulnerability. Although the tanks were constructed from thick steel, reportedly resistant to most bullets, they were far from invincible. A direct hit from a heavier caliber weapon could puncture the steel. The nitrogen tank operated under 300 pounds of pressure and could rupture from concussion or shrapnel. If rupture occurred while the operator was actively firing, the sudden pressure loss could trigger violent blowback that would shred him. If a fuel tank ruptured during firing, when flame was already discharging, immediate incineration followed. The Japanese understood this cruel mathematics and adjusted their aim accordingly. The psychological weight pressed down hard. Flamethrower operators became priority targets, hunted the moment they opened fire. Enemy soldiers focused their weapons on them with singular intensity. Survival odds dropped with each mission. Their weapon made escape through surrender impossible. Japanese defenders who watched flamethrower operators approach their positions understood they faced immolation. They fought with the desperation of men staring into certain death. Some attempted wild bayonet charges to kill the operator before he could fire. Others held their fire until the operator became completely exposed, then unleashed everything they possessed. On February 23rd, 4 days into the battle, Woody Williams found himself facing the nightmare every flamethrower operator dreaded most. His company had been trying to cross one of the island's 2 operational airfields, but remained pinned by relentless fire from multiple Japanese pillboxes. 3 different companies had already attempted to advance across the open ground. None had succeeded. All had been halted with grievous losses. Marine tanks had tried to support the assault, but had been destroyed or forced back by Japanese anti-tank guns and artillery. The battalion commander gathered his officers in a shell crater, away from Japanese eyes. He approached Williams as the only qualified flamethrower and demolition expert still combat-capable, and asked if he would tackle the pillboxes alone. Williams knew what he faced. Every other member of his flamethrower unit had already become a casualty. He would be operating essentially by himself. Yet he also recognized that without those pillboxes neutralized, his entire company would remain trapped, bleeding away from machine gun and artillery fire with no option to advance or withdraw safely. He selected 4 riflemen to lay down covering fire. Their assignment was nearly impossible. They had to keep Japanese positions suppressed while Williams moved into effective range. 2 of those 4 riflemen would not survive the afternoon. The action that followed was later described in Williams' Medal of Honor citation as 4 hours of the most conspicuous gallantry and daring in the face of mortal danger, far beyond normal military obligation. Williams crawled forward toward the first pillbox. His 70-pound flamethrower dragged through deep volcanic ash. Machine gun rounds ricocheted off his steel tanks. The armor held. He reached within 25 yards and unleashed a tremendous ball of flame into the pillbox entrance, ending the threat. He crawled to the next position, spotted smoke leaking from a ventilation hole in the reinforced concrete roof, climbed atop the fortification, and fired the flamethrower nozzle directly into the opening, killing everyone sheltering inside. Through 4 hours, Williams made his way back to his lines 5 separate times to refill his tanks and get fresh ignition cartridges. 5 times he returned to the exposed ground under fire to destroy more positions. During one advance, Japanese soldiers with bayonets charged him, determined to kill him before he could ignite his weapon. Williams met them with flame at point-blank distance. The flamethrower consumed all the oxygen as it formed the fireball, suffocating the charging soldiers instantly. At another moment, Williams came under fire from 3 separate directions at once. He could not stop. Stopping meant certain death. His 4 riflemen, dropping to 3, then to 2 as casualties mounted, barely managed to keep the Japanese suppressed long enough for Williams to engage each position. When the fighting ended, Williams had single-handedly destroyed 7 major pillboxes that had halted 3 Marine companies completely. He had sprayed dozens of gallons of flamethrower fuel. He had sustained injuries that would earn him a Purple Heart. And he had shown why flamethrower operators, despite the 92% casualty rate, held the status of the most valuable specialists on Iwo Jima. Williams' feat, while extraordinary in achievement, reflected the typical dangers all operators faced. Private First Class Joseph Rybukovich experienced similar situations repeatedly throughout his 30 days on Iwo Jima. Rybukovich carried 90 pounds of equipment on his shoulders, including the flamethrower itself, when he landed on February 21st. His first moment was falling face first into volcanic ash and vomiting from seasickness. Then he began fighting. Over the following month, he would destroy 7 pillboxes and caves, each encounter a separate trial of exposure, constant fire, and returning enemy fire. On March 8th, Rybukovich's unit advanced through a narrow gully and found a pillbox positioned just above them on higher ground. Before they could pull back from the confined passage, 4 Marines were killed and 5 wounded by machine gun fire. Rybukovich provided first aid to 2 wounded men and somehow carried both of them back to the aid station while enemy fire continued. A hand grenade exploded nearby and shrapnel scraped his knuckles, but he thought it too minor to report. He returned to his unit, asked a nearby Browning automatic rifle gunner to provide cover, and moved forward with his flamethrower. Furious at watching friends killed and wounded in that narrow passage, he advanced and delivered a long, sustained burst of flame that completely burned out the pillbox. The following day, a doctor examined his bloodied hand and sent him temporarily to get treatment. After receiving first aid and having his hand bandaged, Rybukovich went back to the front lines. He later admitted that returning to combat proved most terrifying, knowing he faced those same dangers repeatedly until either he fell or the battle ended. The death rate among flamethrower operators resulted from multiple brutal factors working together. First came the simple math of close-range combat. Using the weapon required approaching within 20 meters of enemy positions. At that distance, even an average shot could not miss. The Japanese defenders proved far more accurate than American propaganda suggested they would be. The myth of Japanese marksmanship being poor died at Iwo Jima, buried with thousands of Marines. Second was the visibility the weapon created when in use. The orange flame stretched across the entire battlefield. Smoke from burning positions marked where the operator stood. Even when the operator held his fire, the distinctive shape of the backpack identified him as a high-value target deserving of priority attention. Third involved the limited duration of each engagement. 7 to 8 seconds of continuous burn time meant the operator had to make each burst count. But even short bursts created visible flame that revealed his position. Neutralizing most targets required multiple bursts, meaning repeated exposures, repeated chances for enemy fire to find him. Fourth was the burden on mobility. A Marine rifleman carrying an M1 Garand and standard combat load could run quickly, drop to the ground, zigzag to escape incoming fire. A flamethrower operator carrying 70 pounds of steel tanks connected to a firing wand by a bulky rubber hose could not move with such speed or agility. Throwing himself prone risked damage to the equipment. Sprinting threw off his balance under the weight. Firing accurately while moving fast was impossible. He had to advance slowly, staying exposed far longer than any rifleman could tolerate. Fifth was deliberate targeting based on what the weapon represented. The Japanese recognized that flamethrower operators posed their greatest threat. Artillery and naval bombardment created terror, though often proved ineffective against underground fortifications. Rifle fire and grenades could be endured, but flame flowing into tunnels and pillboxes, consuming oxygen and generating unbearable heat, brought death more horrifying than any other method. Japanese fighters harbored special vengeance toward flamethrower operators and prioritized their elimination. The sixth factor proved perhaps most insidious: the mathematics of repeated exposure. Each time an operator engaged a position, he faced roughly equivalent danger. Over the course of many missions, cumulative probability turned against survival. An operator might survive one mission through fortune and skill. He might survive 5. Yet across weeks of fighting, engaging many positions, statistical likelihood of taking a hit approached inevitability. Military statisticians calculating the average combat lifespan at 4 minutes were not describing a single engagement. They measured cumulative time under fire across many missions until the operator became a casualty. Seventh came the threat from friendly forces. Marine artillery, naval bombardment, and aircraft support were essential to break Japanese positions before ground assault. But these weapons created tremendous danger to nearby troops. Flamethrower operators, of necessity, worked closer to enemy positions than anyone else. Slightly short artillery rounds killed Americans as effectively as Japanese fire. Naval shells landing even marginally off target could obliterate entire squads. When Marines requested supporting fires in danger-close distances, they accepted that risk. Flamethrower operators, working within meters of enemy fortifications, existed constantly in friendly fire zones. The death of Corporal Edgar O. Anthony illustrated this random brutality. On March 3rd, Anthony served with Company Y, 3rd Battalion, 26th Marines, 5th Marine Division. He carried his flamethrower forward when a Japanese sniper's bullet struck the fuel tanks on his back. The impact created a catastrophic fuel leak. Diesel and aviation gas mixture drenched him completely. A fraction of a second later, the igniter on his weapon sparked. Flames consumed him instantly. He burned to death in front of his squad. The military initially reported him as missing in action. His body bore such severe burning that identification proved impossible in the field. Dental records identified him later, and he received burial at Manila American Cemetery. Anthony would have turned 23 in April had he survived. He never left Iwo Jima. The development of flamethrower tanks represented an effort to reduce operator casualties through armored protection. The M4A3R3 Zippo tank, named for the famous cigarette lighter, was a standard Sherman tank with its main gun replaced by a large-capacity flamethrower. Navy teams working at Schofield Barracks in Hawaii under Colonel Unmacht developed the Ronson CBH-1 and improved CBH-2 flamethrower systems that mounted onto Sherman tanks. These tank-based flamethrowers operated at 300 pounds per square inch of pressure, delivering flame to 400 feet, far exceeding the portable M2's range. The tank's armor shielded the crew from rifle fire and most artillery fragments. The fuel capacity vastly exceeded what portable systems carried. 300 gallons compared to the M2's 4 gallons. The tanks could maintain fire for extended periods, could maneuver under direct enemy fire, and most critically, did not expose human operators to the same vulnerability as man-portable flamethrowers. 8 of these flame tanks landed on February 19th, arriving with the first wave. They remained unused until February 21st, as commanders questioned their effectiveness initially. Once they entered the fighting, their impact proved devastating. The Zippo tanks could reach pillboxes and cave entrances that would mean certain death for infantry. They could discharge hundreds of gallons of napalm into openings, creating firestorms that destroyed everything inside. The effect on Japanese defenders ran deep and psychological. Multiple Marine commanders stated after the battle concluded that flamethrower tanks represented the single most valuable weapon employed at Iwo Jima. Captain Frank C. Caldwell, commanding Company C, 26th Marines, spoke with complete candor about how he viewed the victory. In his assessment, the flamethrower tank, more than any other supporting weapon, had determined the outcome of the entire battle. The armor couldn't make up for what troops had to do on foot. The ground itself worked against the machines. Ravines cut deep into the landscape. Slopes rose at angles too steep to climb. Obstacles scattered everywhere created dead ends for vehicles. Tank commanders quickly discovered that many of the positions they faced could only be reached by soldiers moving on their own 2 feet. Narrow cave openings simply couldn't be touched by tank weapons. Fortified gun emplacements sat tucked away on reverse slopes, hidden in the folds of terrain. completely unreachable by any mechanized flame weapon. Because of this, the portable M2 units in the hands of individual operators remained absolutely essential to the fight. Men carrying those devices weren't becoming less necessary, they were becoming more so. The operators kept falling. When the fighting finally stopped on March 26th, after more than 5 weeks of relentless combat, the numbers painted a grim picture of savage warfare. The Marine Corps absorbed roughly 24,000 casualties in total. Of that staggering number, almost 7,000 never came home. They were killed in action, they died from their wounds, or they simply vanished, their fates unknown and presumed fatal. One Marine or Navy corpsman became a casualty for every 3 who stepped off the landing craft. This wasn't just another battle, it was the deadliest in Marine Corps history, exceeding the horrors of Tarawa, Saipan, and Guam combined. It held a distinction no other Pacific battle could claim. American losses outnumbered Japanese losses. That grim milestone reflected General Kuribayashi's brilliance as a commander and his absolute refusal to accept surrender. Every man under his command was expected to inflict maximum damage on the Americans before dying. The Japanese defenders, numbering around 21,000, showed the world their commitment. Only 216 walked into captivity. The rest perished. Some died burned alive in their caves, consumed by flames they couldn't escape. Others were entombed when explosives collapsed their tunnel networks around them. Many fell during the final desperate charges and counterattacks. General Kuribayashi himself likely died on March 26 during a last-ditch assault, though no one ever positively confirmed his body or final moments. His defensive strategy achieved exactly what he'd envisioned. Fighting from deep, layered positions, refusing to waste soldiers on futile charges, making every yard cost American blood. It worked precisely as planned. America paid in lives. The Medal of Honor itself became a measure of sacrifice. 27 of these highest awards went to men who fought at Iwo. No other battle in American history had produced so many. 12 of those medals recognized acts of close-quarters combat, situations where flamethrowers proved absolutely critical. Only half of those 12 men lived to wear their medals home. The other half died performing the very actions that earned them those honors. Woody Williams held his Medal of Honor ceremony with President Harry Truman presiding in October 1945. He became the last surviving Medal of Honor recipient from all of World War II, holding that distinction until his death in 2022 at age 98. After the war ended, Williams wrestled with demons that wouldn't leave him. Nightmares plagued him. He saw faces, the faces of men he'd killed. He heard their screams as they burned. He remembered friends collapsing beside him, their lives ending in an instant. Those memories tormented him for years until 1962 arrived. That year brought religious awakening, and the nightmares finally released their grip. From that point forward, he dedicated himself to helping other veterans, creating the Medal of Honor Foundation bearing his name and traveling the country describing what war actually costs. Joseph Rybakiewicz made it off the island alive, but carried wounds that never fully healed. Shrapnel from a grenade had torn into his hand. The damage never went away completely. The deeper injuries weren't visible, though. They lived in his mind and heart. He kept a photograph he'd taken from a dead Japanese soldier. The picture showed a man's wife and their children. Beside that photo sat a medical kit and bayonet taken from another fallen enemy. Those items haunted him his entire life. Before he passed away, he asked his wife to contact Japanese authorities, hoping somehow to return these possessions, trying in some way to atone for what he'd done as a flamethrower operator. The Japanese consulate in San Francisco showed no real interest in his effort. Rybakiewicz carried the weight of those decisions for decades. The caves presented another burden. Near the end of the fighting, when Japanese ammunition was running low, you never knew who was hiding in those dark spaces. Soldiers for certain, but also Korean laborers forced into service, Okinawan civilians who'd sought shelter, possibly even women and children pressed into combat roles. The flamethrower asked no questions. It destroyed everything and everyone in its path, combatant and innocent alike. The numbers for flamethrower operators in one Marine battalion approached 92% casualties. No other specialized military unit in American military history had suffered losses remotely close to that percentage. Compare that to rifle platoons across Iwo Jima, which lost roughly 33% of their strength by battle's end. Artillery units sitting further back sustained much lower losses. Tank crews, despite Japanese anti-tank weapons that could pierce their armor, had casualty rates well below the flamethrower operators. Only the men carrying flamethrowers faced almost certain wounds or death. The calculation about 4-minute combat lifespans, though debated by historians about its exact accuracy, captured a fundamental truth that every operator grasped intuitively. When you engaged a target with that weapon, you were gambling with odds heavily stacked against you ever walking away. Why would anyone volunteer for such duty? The casualty rates were appalling. What made men step forward knowing their survival was probably impossible? The reasons were different for each man. Some, like Joseph Rybakiewicz, initially volunteered from patriotic conviction. They didn't fully understand what they were volunteering for until flamethrower school started. Others found themselves selected based on their physical build. The best operators were large, muscular men capable of lugging 70 pounds of equipment into combat on top of everything else they carried. Corporal Womack earned respect from his unit because he possessed the size and strength to manage that weight when smaller men simply couldn't. Some recognized how important the weapon actually was. Marines who'd watched friends die attacking pillboxes without sufficient support understood that flamethrowers actually saved lives by being so devastatingly effective at taking lives. Others continued carrying the weapon not from personal choice, but from commitment to their squad. When your position got surrounded, when buddies were falling around you, when the only path forward required destroying an enemy strongpoint, men grabbed flamethrowers and charged forward. Private First Class Rudy Ortiz had zero experience with flamethrowers when his Medal of Honor citation was written. Yet he volunteered multiple times after 2 trained operators became casualties. He carried that heavy weapon through murderous fire again and again, helping demolish 10 Japanese pillboxes before a massive barrage killed him on March 1st. He was trying to save his entire company. Ortiz wasn't trained, he wasn't assigned. He stepped up because his Marines needed someone to do it. Historians still debate whether Iwo Jima was worth the price. The official reasoning pointed to removing Japanese early warning stations, ending fighter attacks on our bombers, and creating emergency landing sites for damaged aircraft. After the war, over 2,200 B-29 bombers made emergency landings there, potentially saving roughly 24,000 aircrew members. Some revisionist historians, like Captain Robert Burrell, questioned those numbers, arguing many landings were routine refueling stops rather than genuine emergencies. Nobody had asked the Marines paying in blood what they thought about the strategic calculations. What remains undeniable is how Iwo Jima shifted American military planning forever. The horrific casualties, the way Japanese defenders essentially fought until the last man fell, convinced military strategists that invading the main Japanese islands would cost hundreds of thousands, possibly over 1 million American lives. The violence displayed at Iwo Jima, combined with the even bloodier Battle of Okinawa that followed, persuaded President Truman that atomic weapons offered a path to victory without catastrophic invasion losses. In a bitter irony, the flamethrower operators' suffering helped justify the decision to end the war through nuclear weapons, rather than ground assault. For those who survived Iwo Jima, the aftermath proved brutally difficult. The psychological scars ran deep. Woody Williams described storing memories in compartments of his mind, acknowledging that whenever you end a human life, consequences follow if you possess any conscience at all. The way flamethrowers killed was especially troubling. Riflemen could sometimes create psychological distance from their targets. Artillery crews might never witness their shells' impact. Flamethrower operators experienced everything firsthand. They heard the sounds. They smelled burning skin and hair. They watched men trying desperately to escape the inferno. Bodies writhed and convulsed in the flames until death ended their suffering. Inflicting such death, even upon enemies actively trying to kill you, created psychological devastation. Operators like Rybakiewicz often collected items from dead enemies. then spent decades disturbed by these tangible reminders of the humanity they'd destroyed. The photograph showing a Japanese soldier's wife and children represented the cruelest kind of keepsake. It forced Rybakiewicz to confront the fact that every enemy he killed had been a real person, someone's beloved spouse, someone's father, someone's son. The caves added moral complexity. When operators advanced toward cave entrances, they couldn't know who waited inside. Japanese soldiers certainly, but possibly also Korean forced laborers, Okinawan people who'd taken refuge underground, civilians hiding from the shelling and fighting. The flamethrower made no distinctions. Everyone inside perished. Post-traumatic stress, though not formally identified or treated for decades afterward, devastated flamethrower operators disproportionately. Extended combat exposure, the intimate brutality of flamethrower killing, guilt over fallen friends, and the moral burden of their actions created psychological damage that surfaced as nightmares, depression, drinking problems, and struggles to fit back into civilian society. Many operators remained silent about their experiences for decades. When they finally spoke, usually as elderly men, the memories remained sharp and painful. Iwo Jima's lessons reshaped Marine Corps doctrine profoundly. The battle proved that coordinated operations combining infantry, armor, artillery, naval bombardment, and air support defeated even extremely well-prepared defenders. It demonstrated that specialized weapons like flamethrowers were absolutely critical for destroying fortified positions. General Kuribayashi's tactics influenced not just Japanese military thinking, but transformed American understanding of how determined defenders could make attackers pay terrible prices, even in apparently hopeless situations. Military academies worldwide studied Iwo Jima. Its lessons influenced defensive planning from the Cold War through modern counterinsurgency. The Marine Corps War Memorial overlooking Arlington Cemetery, completed in 1954, depicts Joe Rosenthal's iconic photograph of Marines raising the flag on Mount Suribachi. That towering statue symbolizes Marine courage, sacrifice, and victory. Yet 3 of the 6 men shown raising that flag died on Iwo Jima. Franklin Sousley fell to sniper fire on March 21st. Harlan Block died when a mortar round found him on March 1st. Michael Strank was killed by Marine artillery fire that same day. The monument honors all Marines, but it carries special weight for those who endured that particular battle. Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz spoke at the dedication of Marine Division cemeteries on Iwo Jima in March 1945. His words became legendary throughout Marine history. He observed that among the men who fought on Iwo Jima, uncommon valor was a common virtue. That valor shone brightest through the flamethrower operators who moved forward into near-certain death to protect squad mates and accomplish their objectives. They knew those 92% casualty rates meant they'd probably die. They advanced anyway because their brothers depended on them, because the mission required it, because someone had to carry that weapon forward. The 70-pound flamethrower, capable of burning for 7 seconds with a 20-meter effective range, represented the deadliest weapon Marines possessed for neutralizing Japanese fortifications on Iwo Jima. It was also the deadliest assignment in the deadliest battle in Marine Corps history. The men who carried it paid enormously. The overwhelming majority of those deployed became casualties. Survivors carried physical and psychological wounds their entire lives. Those who died often couldn't be identified afterward. Their bodies burned beyond recognition, buried in mass graves, or simply marked missing in action when recovery proved impossible. Today, Iwo Jima has returned to Japanese control. It's called Iwo To now, a small change reflecting proper Japanese pronunciation. The island remains sparsely populated, serving mainly as a self-defense force base, closed to casual tourism. Tunnels and fortifications still stand, slowly weathering but unmistakably present. Beaches where Marines landed remain unchanged, still darkened by volcanic sand. Every year, on the landing's anniversary, surviving veterans make the journey if they can. Their numbers shrink annually. The youngest are approaching 100 years old. They gather on those beaches, stand before monuments to fallen friends, and remember. Woody Williams journeyed to Iwo Jima dozens of times before his death. He met Japanese veterans, former enemies who saw the battle from the opposite side. These reunions brought together men who'd tried killing each other, now elderly and reflective, seeking understanding across old battle lines. Williams spoke at those gatherings about how Americans arrived as enemies but departed as students, having learned hard lessons about courage, sacrifice, and warfare's true costs. The flamethrower operators at Iwo Jima represented America's diversity. Volunteers and conscripts, farm boys and city dwellers, college men and factory workers. They were regular Americans thrust into horrific circumstances. They spent weeks training to master equipment designed to probably kill them. They advanced through fire and steel, carrying 70 pounds of fuel and explosives, their position marked by brilliant orange flame, destroying positions threatening their comrades. 92% of them in one battalion were wounded or killed. Their story exposes specialized warfare's brutal reality. Military planners knew the risks. Operators knew the risks. The weapon was so devastatingly effective, so essential to mission success, that military logic deemed the terrible cost acceptable. In war's mathematics, some lives are spent saving others. Individual sacrifice serves larger objectives. Missions demand that certain men walk into fire so others survive. Iwo Jima's mathematics were merciless. 7,000 Americans died, 20,000 more were wounded. 21,000 Japanese perished. An 8-square-mile island purchased at the cost of over 27,000 American casualties and nearly complete Japanese destruction. Among those Americans, flamethrower operators suffered the highest proportional casualties of any unit type. They were the sharpest point of the attack, the most vulnerable soldiers in the most exposed positions during the most brutal battle. 79 years later, as the last battle survivors pass away, their legacy endures. The Marine Corps War Memorial stands in Arlington. Stone carries the names of the dead. Medal of Honor citations recount extraordinary bravery. But behind those citations, those memorials, those numbers were actual people. Young men carried fire into battle. They died at rates almost incomprehensible. They volunteered or were assigned to the most dangerous military duty ever, fulfilling that duty even though it killed them. Why did 92% of flamethrower operators become casualties? The answer seems straightforward. Their weapon devastated fortified positions but required standing exposed at close range, while enemy soldiers, recognizing the threat, concentrated their fire accordingly. But the deeper question remains yours to answer. Why did Joseph Robakiewicz return to fighting after his hand wound healed? Why did Woody Williams crawl forward 5 separate times to reload? Why did Rudy Ortiz, untrained in flamethrower use, repeatedly volunteered after experienced men fell? The answer lies somewhere else entirely, in bonds between Marines, in refusal to let comrades die when you might save them, in recognition that duty sometimes demands self-sacrifice, in courage to act knowing you'll probably die. These weren't suicidal men. They weren't ignorant of danger. They understood the risks completely and advanced regardless. That wasn't foolishness or ignorance. That was courage in its truest form, willingness to accept terrible risk for something larger than self-preservation. The 92% casualty rate among flamethrower operators on Iwo Jima stands as proof of that courage and its price. They walked into fire, many knowing they wouldn't emerge alive. They did it anyway. That explains their casualties, and that's why they're remembered.